It was a warm afternoon in the city. The streets were busy, filled with people rushing home after work, and cars moving slowly through traffic lights. A black woman named Denise was driving her dark blue sedan, the same car she had driven for years. She had just finished a long day at the courthouse. The files on the passenger seat were neatly stacked, showing how organized she was. She was tired, but there was a small smile on her face because she had just won a tough case that day. She worked hard to protect people's rights, and her job meant a lot to her. As she turned down a quieter street, she hummed softly along with the radio. Her mind drifted to what she might cook for dinner, or maybe if she should just order takeout instead. It was an ordinary drive home, until she saw flashing blue lights appear in her rearview mirror. For a moment, her stomach dropped. She looked at her speedometer. She wasn't speeding. She hadn't done anything wrong. Still, she carefully slowed down and pulled her car to the side of the road. Denise took a deep breath and placed her hands on the steering wheel where they were clearly visible. She had been taught to always stay calm in situations like this. The flashing lights reflected off her side mirror, painting the inside of her car with a swirl of red and blue. A tall police officer stepped out of his car and walked toward her. His expression was serious, almost cold. He tapped on her window and she rolled it down. "License and registration," he said sharply. Denise nodded politely. "Of course, officer." She reached into her bag slowly, letting him see every movement. She handed him her driver's license and registration. "Can I ask what the problem is?" "You rolled through a stop sign back there," the officer said without even looking at her. Denise frowned slightly. She was sure she had stopped, but she didn't argue. "I see. I'll be more careful next time," she said in a calm tone. The officer stared at her car for a moment, then asked, "Is this your vehicle?" "Yes, sir." "It's registered in my name," she replied politely. He raised an eyebrow, glancing at the luxury logo on the steering wheel. "Pretty expensive car," he said in a tone that didn't sound like a compliment. Denise smiled faintly, trying to keep things light. "I work for the state. It's my personal car." The officer narrowed his eyes. "You work for the state?" "Doing what?" "I'm an attorney," she answered simply. He smirked. "Sure you are." Denise blinked, a little taken aback by his tone. "Yes, I am. I can show you my work ID if you'd like." But instead of responding, he leaned slightly closer to her window. "Step out of the car," he ordered. She hesitated. "Officer, may I ask why? I've given you my documents and—" "Step out of the car," he repeated more firmly. Denise didn't want to escalate the situation. She knew how quickly misunderstandings could happen. Slowly, she unbuckled her seatbelt, opened the door, and stepped outside. The air was heavy, and a few people nearby had stopped to watch. The officer asked her to stand near the back of her car. She complied, keeping her tone steady and her body language calm. He began questioning her again, where she worked, where she was going, and why she was in this neighborhood. Denise answered each question clearly, but his attitude didn't change. He kept pressing as if trying to catch her in a lie. "Look," she said softly, "I understand you're doing your job, but I promise you, I haven't done anything wrong." I stopped at the sign. "I'm just on my way home," he folded his arms. "You think you can talk your way out of this because you wear a suit and drive a fancy car?" "I'm not trying to talk my way out of anything," Denise replied quietly. "I just want to understand what's happening." The officer sighed and shook his head. "You're making this harder than it needs to be. Turn around and put your hands behind your back." Denise froze. "Excuse me?" "You're resisting an officer," he said bluntly. A few bystanders gasped. Denise's heart pounded in her chest. She wasn't resisting. She hadn't even raised her voice. "Officer, please," she said calmly, "I'm not resisting. I just—" Before she could finish, he grabbed her arm and turned her around. The cold metal of the handcuffs closed around her wrists. A small crowd started filming with their phones. Someone shouted, "She didn't do anything." Denise stayed silent. She could feel the eyes of strangers on her, the humiliation burning deep inside her chest. She knew that saying anything now might only make things worse. So she focused on her breathing and told herself to stay calm. He led her toward the patrol car. The sound of the cuffs rattling echoed in her ears. She glanced at the people watching, hoping someone might at least remember what really happened. At the police car, the officer pushed her slightly as he opened the door. "Watch your head," he muttered. Denise sat in the back seat, her wrists aching. Through the window, she could see the files still sitting on her passenger seat, files she needed for tomorrow's hearing. It all felt surreal. She had spent her life defending people's rights, and now she was sitting in handcuffs for no reason. The drive to the precinct felt endless. The officer didn't say a word. Denise watched the city lights blur past, thinking about what her coworkers would say if they saw her like this. She wondered how long she would be kept there, and how she would even explain it. When they arrived at the station, another officer opened the door for her. This one looked kinder, though surprised to see a woman in professional clothes being brought in. "What's the charge?" the second officer asked. "Resisting," the first officer said quickly. The second officer gave him a doubtful look. Denise didn't say a word. She just followed as they led her inside. The smell of old coffee and paper filled the air. The lights were harsh and cold. They took her fingerprints, her photo, and asked for her personal information. She answered everything politely, even though she felt humiliated. When she was finally allowed to sit, she asked softly, "Can I please speak to a supervisor?" The officer at the desk looked at her with a hint of curiosity. "You're a lawyer, right?" "Yes," she said. "A state attorney." He blinked, then looked down at her paperwork again. "Wait, you mean you actually work for the Attorney General's office?" "Yes," she replied. He stood up immediately and whispered something to a colleague. Within minutes, a senior officer came out from the back office. He looked at her, then at the arrest report, and his expression changed completely. "Is this correct?" he asked the arresting officer. "Yeah," the officer muttered. She was being difficult. The senior officer looked back at Denise. "Ma'am, I'm very sorry about this. Could you please wait here for a moment?" Denise nodded silently. She could see the tension between the two men. She didn't feel angry anymore, just tired. She had seen injustice before, but experiencing it firsthand was something different. After a few minutes, the senior officer returned. "Ma'am, there's clearly been a mistake. We're going to get this sorted out immediately." Denise looked up at him. "Thank you. I just want to go home." He nodded apologetically. "Of course. I'm very sorry for the treatment you received." The arresting officer stood nearby, looking uncomfortable. He didn't meet her eyes. Denise didn't say anything to him. She simply took her belongings and walked out quietly once they released her. The night air felt cool against her skin. As she stepped outside, she took a deep breath, feeling the weight of what had just happened. She didn't want revenge. She didn't even want to talk about it yet. All she wanted was peace. But deep down, she knew this wasn't over. The truth had to come out. The people who saw everything would share what they recorded. The truth always found a way. As she got back into her car, she looked in the mirror. Her reflection showed a woman who had been through something painful, but still carried herself with grace. She adjusted her blazer, started the engine, and drove home quietly. That night, she sat alone in her living room, sipping water, replaying every moment in her mind. She had spent her whole career fighting for justice for others. Now it seemed life had just handed her a new case, one she hadn't chosen, but one she knew she had to face. Denise didn't know yet how big this story would become. She didn't know that the video would soon spread everywhere, or that people across the city would be talking about her arrest. All she knew in that quiet moment was that she would stand firm. She would tell the truth. And one day soon, the people who doubted her would know exactly who she was. The next morning came slowly for Denise. She had barely slept. The events from the night before kept replaying in her mind like an old film she couldn't turn off. Every time she closed her eyes, she could still see the flashing blue lights, hear the officer's sharp voice, and feel the cold steel of the handcuffs against her wrists. It wasn't just the embarrassment that hurt, it was the feeling of being powerless. Even though she had spent her whole life standing up for others who faced the same thing, the sunlight peeked through her curtains, casting long stripes across the floor. She sat quietly at her kitchen table, sipping her coffee, staring at the mug more than drinking from it. Her phone buzzed nonstop with messages from co-workers and friends. News traveled fast, and it seemed like the entire legal office had already heard about what happened. A few of them sent messages of support, telling her to stay strong. Some offered to come over, but Denise wasn't ready to talk face to face. Not yet. Around mid-morning, she got a call from her supervisor, a kind but serious man who had worked in the state office for years. "I heard what happened," he said gently. "Are you all right?" I'm fine, Denise replied quietly. Just shaken, he paused. We're looking into it already. The police chief has been contacted. They're aware of who you are now. Apparently, the officer had no idea he was arresting one of our own. Denise sighed. That's not really the point, though, is it? I know, he said softly. But we'll make sure it's handled properly. Just take the day off, rest, she thanked him and hung up. But rest wasn't easy. She opened her laptop and searched her name online. Within seconds, her heart skipped. There were already videos of the arrest posted on social media. Several people had uploaded clips from their phones. She clicked on one. The video showed the officer raising his voice, pulling her arms behind her back while she tried to speak calmly. The comments below were filled with people expressing outrage and disbelief. Why did he arrest her? She didn't do anything wrong. She was so calm the whole time. This is unbelievable. The video had already been shared thousands of times. Denise closed the laptop and leaned back, taking a deep breath. Part of her felt grateful that people had seen the truth, but another part of her felt exposed. She didn't want attention. She wanted change. By noon, reporters had already started calling. Someone must have leaked her name. She didn't answer. Instead, she decided to go for a short walk to clear her mind. The neighborhood felt different that day. People seemed to recognize her, though she wasn't sure if they actually did or if she was just imagining it. When she returned home, she found a note slipped under her door. It was from her neighbor, an elderly woman who had seen the video. The note simply said, "I'm proud of how you handled yourself. Don't let this break you." Those few words made Denise tear up. She had held everything in since last night, but now the weight of it all came crashing down. She sat on her couch crying softly, letting herself feel everything she had tried to hold back. It wasn't just about her. It was about every time she had watched people go through similar pain in court and wondered how they kept their dignity. Now she knew. Later that afternoon, she received another call, this time from someone she didn't expect. It was the police chief himself, Ms. Denise. His voice came through the line, careful and polite. "I want to personally apologize for what happened yesterday. This department takes matters like this seriously. The officer involved has been placed on administrative leave while we conduct an investigation." Denise listened silently for a moment. "Thank you for reaching out," she said slowly. "But I hope this isn't just about me. This is something that happens far too often." "I understand," the chief said. "We're committed to finding out exactly what went wrong." After the call ended, Denise felt a mix of relief and frustration. Words were easy. Change was not. Still, she knew she had to stay composed. She wasn't just any citizen, she was a lawyer, someone who understood how to make things right through the system. That evening, she was invited to speak with an internal review board. It was fast, too fast in her opinion, but she agreed. When she arrived at the station, the same one where she had been handcuffed less than 24 hours ago, she felt a cold knot in her stomach. The walls, the smell, the floor, it all reminded her of last night. But she held her head high and walked in. Several officers were already there, including the senior officer who had released her. He gave her a respectful nod. The officer who arrested her wasn't in the room. She was told he had been removed from active duty pending investigation. They asked her to describe what happened from her point of view. She spoke calmly, clearly, and truthfully. She explained how she was stopped, how she cooperated, and how the situation escalated for no reason. The room was silent as she spoke. When she finished, one of the senior officials said quietly, "I'm sorry you had to go through that." Denise simply replied, "I just want to make sure no one else has to." After the meeting, she stepped outside and was greeted by several reporters waiting by the entrance. Cameras flashed, microphones were pushed toward her, and questions poured out all at once. "Ma'am, how do you feel about what happened? Do you plan to take legal action? Do you think race played a role in this incident?" Denise paused, taking a breath before answering. "I believe what happened to me should never happen to anyone. I'm not here to attack anyone. I just want fairness and accountability. That's all." Her calm, measured response was broadcast that night across every major news channel. People admired her composure. Viewers saw not just a woman who had been wronged, but a professional who handled herself with strength and grace. Over the next few days, things grew more intense. The officer's name was released to the public, and more people began to share their own experiences with him online. Complaints that had gone unnoticed before suddenly resurfaced. Denise didn't want revenge, but she couldn't deny the satisfaction of seeing the truth finally surface. Her co-workers rallied behind her, showing support both in person and online. Some called her brave for staying calm when many others might have lost control. Her family, too, stood by her side, checking on her every day. Her mother's voice on the phone reminded her to take care of herself, to eat and to rest. Despite the chaos, Denise tried to stay focused on her work. She returned to the courthouse within a week, determined to show that she wouldn't let this incident define her. When she walked through the halls, people looked at her differently, not with pity but with respect. One afternoon, while preparing for a case, a young intern approached her nervously. "Ma'am, I saw your interview," he said. "You handled it better than anyone could have. It really inspired me." Denise smiled warmly. "Thank you. Remember, the law isn't just about rules, it's about people. Never forget that." That night, when she got home, she finally allowed herself to breathe a little easier. The fear that had gripped her since that night had started to fade. But deep down, she knew the story wasn't over. The officer's disciplinary hearing was coming soon, and the department had already promised a public review. She sat by the window, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. It struck her how quickly life could change. One ordinary drive home had turned into something that would alter not only her life, but maybe the way people looked at justice. Before going to bed, she opened her notebook and began writing. Not legal notes, not work files, just her thoughts. She wrote about what it felt like to be treated unfairly, about the weight of silence, and about the power of staying calm when the world tries to break you. As she closed the notebook, she smiled softly. For the first time since that night, she felt a sense of peace. What had happened to her was painful, yes, but it had also opened doors for conversation, for awareness, for truth. She didn't know what would happen next, but she was ready. She knew that change never came easily, but it always started with someone who refused to stay silent, and if she had to be that person, she would be. The night grew quiet again, and Denise finally turned off the lights. Outside, the world kept moving, unaware that one woman's strength had already started to change it. The days after the arrest felt like a whirlwind for Denise. Every morning she woke up to a flood of messages, emails, and calls. Some were supportive, filled with words of encouragement from colleagues, friends, and strangers who had seen the video. Others were curious or skeptical, asking why the police would ever treat her that way. She read everything carefully, not because she wanted attention, but because she knew this was a chance to show how truth and calm could overcome prejudice. It started with the phone calls. Reporters wanted interviews, talk shows wanted her on air, and legal analysts wanted her to explain the situation. Denise declined most of them. She wasn't looking for fame. She only wanted the facts known and justice done. She did agree, however, to speak with the internal review board at the police department again. This time the meeting was more formal, with several officers, supervisors, and legal advisors in the room. She arrived early, dressed professionally, carrying a small folder with her notes. As she entered the room, the senior officer who had first spoken with her the day after the arrest stood to greet her. He had a calm, respectful look in contrast to the officer who had handcuffed her. Denise nodded politely and took a seat. The room was quiet for a moment. The arresting officer wasn't present. It was clear that the department wanted to handle this carefully. Denise opened her folder and began to speak. She recounted the events from start to finish. The traffic stop, the officer's tone, the way he escalated the situation, and her efforts to stay calm. She spoke slowly, choosing every word carefully. She wanted to make sure the officers understood exactly what happened and why it was wrong. "The issue here isn't just about me," she said softly but firmly. "It's about how people are treated based on assumptions. It's about accountability. Every citizen deserves respect and fair treatment, no matter who they are or what they drive." The senior officers listened quietly. One of them took notes, occasionally looking up at her with a thoughtful expression. When she finished, there was a pause. Then one of the supervisors spoke. "Thank you for explaining everything clearly, Ms. Denise. We now understand the gravity of the situation and the mistakes that were made." Denise nodded. "I hope this leads to changes. I hope officers are trained to recognize bias and to act fairly. I don't want anyone else to go through what I experienced." The meeting lasted over an hour. Officers asked questions not to challenge her, but to understand how they could improve procedures. They discussed training programs, accountability measures, and public reporting. Denise stayed professional throughout, never raising her voice, never showing anger. She understood that her calmness gave her words weight. People listened when she spoke because she wasn't reacting emotionally. She was showing them reality. After leaving the department, she went to her office. The courthouse was busier than usual, filled with lawyers, clients, and staff. She was greeted with nods of respect from people who had heard about what happened. Some quietly offered words of encouragement. One of her interns approached her nervously. "Ma'am, I watched the video. I can't believe someone could treat you that way." "You stayed so calm," Denise smiled softly. "It's important to stay calm even when people are unfair. You can't control their actions, but you can control how you respond." Back at her desk, she opened her emails. Messages were coming from community leaders, human rights organizations, and advocacy groups. Some were asking her to speak publicly about her experience, others to participate in forums about racial bias and police accountability. Denise read them all, considering carefully. She knew that sharing her story could make a difference, but she also had to protect her work and personal life. The video of the arrest continued to circulate online. People were discussing it in forums, on social media, and even on local news channels. The comments reflected a mix of outrage and support. Many were shocked that an officer could act so aggressively without knowing who she was. Others shared their own experiences of injustice, and some offered words of solidarity. Denise realized that what had happened to her was bigger than just one person. It was part of a larger conversation about fairness, bias, and respect. She decided to use her position to push for change, not revenge. She reached out to several legal organizations and community groups, offering to speak about her experience and help develop educational programs for law enforcement. Meanwhile, the internal investigation continued. Denise was informed that the officer involved had been placed on administrative leave. Complaints from the public and the department's own review were being collected. She was asked to provide a formal statement, which she did, recounting everything in detail. She included timestamps, descriptions, and observations about the officer's behavior. She stayed objective, focusing on facts rather than emotions. A few days later, she received a call from a high-ranking official in the police department. "Ms. Denise, we want to ensure you that this incident will be fully addressed. We take this very seriously. The officer will be held accountable." Denise replied calmly, "I appreciate that. I just want to make sure it's not just about me. There are many people who face similar treatment. I hope this leads to meaningful change." She hung up the phone and leaned back in her chair. The situation was still overwhelming, but she felt a sense of purpose. She realized that her calmness, professionalism, and dedication to truth had turned a moment of injustice into an opportunity for awareness and reform. The news media continued to follow her story. A local newspaper published an article detailing the arrest and the video that had gone viral. They highlighted her career, her work as a state lawyer, and her calm response during the incident. Public reaction was overwhelmingly supportive. Many expressed shock that the officer had acted without knowing her background, while others praised her composure and professionalism. In the evenings, Denise began writing her thoughts in a personal journal. She wrote about the emotions she had experienced, the lessons she had learned, and the steps she wanted to take moving forward. She reflected on how fear and humiliation could be transformed into strength and purpose. She understood now that staying calm and standing firm in truth could inspire others and create real change. One afternoon, she received an invitation to speak at a community forum on police accountability and racial bias. She accepted, knowing that sharing her experience could educate others and prevent similar incidents in the future. She prepared carefully, making sure her words were clear, simple, and impactful. She wanted people to understand the human side of law enforcement interactions, the importance of fairness, and the need for respect in every situation. Denise's story began to inspire others. Young lawyers, students, and community members reached out to her, thanking her for demonstrating how to handle injustice with dignity. She became a symbol of resilience, showing that even in difficult and humiliating circumstances, one could maintain integrity and effect change. Weeks passed, and the officer involved remained on administrative leave. The police department continued its internal investigation, and Denise stayed informed throughout. She realized that change takes time, but her role was important in ensuring accountability and fairness. She also stayed focused on her daily work, knowing that her career and responsibilities could not be put aside. Evenings at home were quieter now. Denise spent time with her family, catching up on small joys she had neglected during the stressful days. She cooked meals, read books, and took walks through the neighborhood, observing people and life around her. She appreciated the simple moments and the calm that followed the storm of public attention. Despite the chaos, Denise never lost sight of the lessons she had learned. She understood that courage was not just in taking action, but in staying calm when others tried to provoke anger or fear. She realized that one person's response could influence many others, and that her choices mattered not only to herself, but to the community. Her story continued to gain attention, and she became more intentional in using her voice. She spoke at meetings, forums, and gatherings, always emphasizing fairness, accountability, and the human side of law enforcement. She stressed that understanding, respect, and empathy were essential in every interaction, and that bias, whether conscious or unconscious, could cause real harm. Denise also worked closely with advocacy groups, contributing her knowledge and experience to develop programs aimed at educating officers and the public. She helped design workshops, seminars, and training sessions, focusing on communication, respect, and legal rights. Her experience as a state lawyer gave her credibility, and her calm, professional demeanor made her an effective teacher and mentor. As the investigation into the officer continued, Denise realized that her life had changed in ways she hadn't anticipated. She had been forced into a public spotlight, faced humiliation, and experienced fear and anger. Yet through it all, she had remained composed, used her voice, and turned the situation into an opportunity for positive change. Looking back, she understood that the arrest was not just an isolated incident. It was part of a larger pattern of behavior that needed attention and reform. Her experience became a case study, a reminder of the importance of fairness, accountability, and the impact of human behavior in law enforcement. Denise knew the road ahead would not be easy. There were still challenges, scrutiny, and the need for continued advocacy, but she also knew that she had the strength, the knowledge, and the resilience to face whatever came next. She had learned that even in the darkest moments, calmness, professionalism, and truth could light the way. Her story was becoming more than just about her. It was a story of accountability, courage, and the power of standing firm in the face of injustice. Denise had turned a painful experience into a platform for education, awareness, and change. She had shown that one person, through integrity and perseverance, could inspire others and create a ripple effect of understanding and reform. And so, as she continued her work, both in her legal career and in community advocacy, Denise remained a symbol of hope and strength. She had faced humiliation and unfair treatment, but she had emerged stronger, wiser, and more determined to make a difference. The experience had tested her, but it had also shown her the power of calm, courage, and truth in the face of prejudice. The weeks following Denise's arrest were tense, but filled with a sense of purpose. Every day brought updates from the police department and inquiries from the media, but Denise kept her focus on what mattered most: ensuring accountability and fairness. She knew she could not control every reaction, but she could control her response, and that had always been her strength. The internal investigation into the officer's conduct continued, and the department began reviewing similar complaints from the past. It became clear that Denise's case was not an isolated incident. Several other citizens had reported unfair treatment, and some of those complaints had been dismissed without proper review. The leadership of the department realized that this was an opportunity not only to address her case but also to improve the system as a whole. Denise was called back to the police headquarters to provide additional statements. This time she was met with a more professional environment. The senior officer greeted her with a polite nod. Several other officials sat around the table, notebooks and laptops ready to document everything. The atmosphere was calm but serious, and Denise appreciated the shift in tone. "I understand you've been following up with our team," one officer began. "We want to make sure we get a full picture of what happened." Denise nodded. "I'm here to provide whatever information will help ensure that this does not happen again, to me or to anyone else." She recounted the events of the day once more, this time with even more detail. She spoke about the officer's behavior, the way he escalated the situation unnecessarily, and how she had tried to remain calm while being humiliated. She described the environment, the reactions of bystanders, and her own thoughts during each moment. She emphasized the importance of treating people with respect, regardless of their appearance or background. The officials listened carefully, occasionally asking clarifying questions. Denise remained composed, presenting facts without anger, without embellishment. She had learned that truth carried more weight than outrage. Her professionalism made an impact. After the meeting, the senior officer spoke privately with her. "Miss Denise, your account is very clear. We understand the severity of the situation, and we're committed to ensuring that the officer faces appropriate consequences. This type of behavior cannot be tolerated." Denise appreciated the sincerity in his voice. "I don't want revenge," she said softly. "I want accountability, and I want measures in place so this does not happen to anyone else." Over the next few days, the media coverage grew. News outlets shared her story, highlighting not only the arrest but also her calm response and her career as a state lawyer. Public interest surged, and people began sharing their own stories of encounters with law enforcement. Community groups, advocacy organizations, and local leaders reached out to her, asking for guidance and support in raising awareness about bias and misconduct. One afternoon, Denise received an unexpected call. It was from a city council member who had been following her case closely. "Ms. Denise, I wanted to speak with you directly," the council member said. "Your story has sparked conversations across the city. We are discussing reforms to training programs for officers and new accountability measures. We would value your input." Denise felt a surge of purpose. "Thank you for reaching out. I'm happy to help in any way I can. This is bigger than just my case. It's about fairness and justice for everyone." She began meeting with city officials, advocacy groups, and law enforcement trainers. She provided insights on bias awareness, the importance of communication, and strategies for de-escalating situations. She emphasized that respect and professionalism were not optional. They were essential. Meanwhile, the investigation into the officer continued. The department conducted interviews, reviewed past complaints, and analyzed the video footage from the arrest. It became evident that the officer had a history of similar incidents, though they had not been fully addressed before. The leadership decided that disciplinary action was necessary, both for Denise's case and as a broader statement about accountability. The day the officer was called into a formal hearing, Denise felt a mix of emotions. She did not attend the hearing in person, but she followed the proceedings through updates provided by the department. The officer faced a panel of senior officials, and the evidence of his misconduct was presented clearly. Video footage, witness statements, and past complaints all painted a picture of repeated bias and improper behavior. After careful deliberation, the panel reached a decision. The officer was suspended without pay and required to attend mandatory retraining on bias, professionalism, and proper conduct. He was also placed under close supervision for an extended period. The department announced the outcome publicly, emphasizing their commitment to accountability and fairness. Denise read the news and felt a quiet sense of relief. Justice had been served, not in a way that glorified her struggle, but in a way that ensured accountability and the potential for change. She understood that no single action could erase the pain she had experienced, but this outcome sent a message that misconduct would not be tolerated. In the days following, Denise continued her advocacy work. She participated in community forums, spoke at workshops, and met with law enforcement trainers to develop programs aimed at reducing bias and improving communication. She shared her story not as a tale of personal suffering, but as a lesson in professionalism, calmness, and the power of truth. One evening, she received a message from a young law student who had watched the video of her arrest. The student wrote about feeling inspired by Denise's composure and her ability to turn a negative experience into an opportunity for positive change. Denise replied with words of encouragement, reminding the student that courage is often quiet and that integrity in action speaks louder than anger. Through these interactions, Denise realized that her experience had a ripple effect. People were learning from it, discussing it, and taking steps to ensure that bias and misconduct were addressed. Her story was no longer just about her. It had become a catalyst for awareness, education, and reform. Even with all the attention and advocacy, Denise remained grounded. She continued her legal work, handling cases with the same dedication and professionalism she had always shown. She knew that the fight for justice was ongoing, but she was committed to making a difference in every way she could. At home, she found peace in simple routines. She cooked meals, read books, and took walks in the neighborhood, reflecting on how far she had come. She thought about the moments of fear and humiliation she had experienced, and how she had transformed them into strength. She understood now that true courage was not the absence of fear, but the ability to remain composed and act with integrity despite it. The city began to notice changes as well. The police department introduced new training programs, implemented stricter oversight, and encouraged officers to report misconduct. Community members saw that their voices mattered, and that accountability could lead to real reform. Denise's role in these changes was quiet but significant. She had not sought recognition, yet her actions inspired a broader movement toward fairness and respect. Months after the incident, Denise attended a city-sponsored event on police accountability. She spoke to a crowd of community members, law students, and officers. Her words were simple but powerful. Respect and fairness are not optional. Every person deserves to be treated with dignity. Bias, whether conscious or unconscious, affects real lives. We must hold ourselves accountable and ensure that justice is more than just a word. It must be a practice. The audience listened intently. Some nodded, some took notes, and many reflected on their own experiences. Denise's story had become a teaching moment, a reminder that one person's courage and composure could influence many others. That evening, as she walked home, Denise felt a sense of calm satisfaction. The officer had been held accountable, the department was making changes, and her story had inspired conversations across the city. She had faced humiliation, injustice, and fear, but she had emerged stronger, using her experience to educate, advocate, and lead. Her journey was not over, but she knew that she had turned a moment of personal pain into a platform for broader change. She had shown that truth, professionalism, and calmness could triumph over prejudice, and that one person's actions could create a ripple effect that extended far beyond themselves. Denise's life continued, filled with work, advocacy, and personal reflection. She remained committed to justice, fairness, and the belief that every person deserves respect. The incident that could have broken her had instead strengthened her resolve. She understood now that true impact came from turning adversity into action, and from facing injustice not with anger but with integrity and courage. And as she looked toward the future, Denise knew that her experience would continue to guide her. She would continue to speak out, mentor others, and contribute to a system that valued accountability, fairness, and human dignity. The arrest that had once filled her with fear had become a catalyst for change, not only in her life but in the lives of countless others who would learn from her story. Her strength, grace, and professionalism had set an example that could not be ignored. The officer's suspension, the department's reforms, and the public conversations were just the beginning. Denise's story reminded everyone that accountability matters, that courage can be quiet, and that even in the face of injustice, one person can make a difference. Denise woke up that morning with a quiet determination. The past months had been challenging, filled with tension, public attention, and moments of fear. But she had grown stronger through every experience. She had learned that even the most difficult situations could be transformed into opportunities for change, and she was ready to continue her journey with purpose and clarity. Her day began as usual, with a cup of coffee and a few moments of reflection. She looked out of her window at the city streets bustling with life. Cars moved steadily along the roads. People walked quickly to their destinations, and the sun glimmered off the buildings. Life continued as it always did. But Denise understood that sometimes it took only one event to create a ripple that could touch many lives. Her own experience had become that ripple. The internal reforms at the police department were progressing. Officers had been required to attend training sessions focused on bias awareness, proper conduct, and de-escalation techniques. Supervisors had been reminded of the importance of monitoring interactions and ensuring that citizens were treated with respect. The officer who had arrested Denise was still under review, with his suspension maintained and retraining mandatory. These steps were small, but they were meaningful. Denise knew that even incremental change mattered, especially when it set a precedent for accountability. She spent the morning reviewing case files in her office. Her work as a state attorney required focus and precision, and she found comfort in the familiarity of her responsibilities. Yet even in the midst of her legal work, the events of the past months were never far from her mind. She reflected on how quickly life could shift, how an ordinary drive home could turn into a life-altering event, and how courage and composure had allowed her to navigate that moment with dignity. That afternoon, Denise was invited to speak at a community forum hosted by the City Council. The forum focused on improving relations between law enforcement and the community, and Denise's experience was central to the discussion. She prepared carefully, choosing words that were clear, relatable, and inspiring. She wanted her story to resonate with everyone, from young students to seasoned officers, and to highlight the importance of accountability, fairness, and empathy in every interaction. When she arrived at the forum, the room was filled with people from all walks of life. Community leaders, law enforcement officers, students, and ordinary citizens had come to listen. The energy in the room was attentive and respectful. Denise stepped to the podium and took a deep breath before speaking. "Good afternoon," she began. "I want to share my experience, not to draw attention to myself, but to show how important it is for all of us to act with fairness, respect, and accountability. Each interaction we have, whether small or significant, shapes the way people perceive justice and humanity." She recounted the arrest, focusing on the facts in her response. She described the officer's behavior, the reactions of bystanders, and how she maintained composure despite being humiliated. She emphasized that respect and professionalism are essential, not optional, and that bias, whether conscious or unconscious, can have serious consequences. The audience listened intently, many nodding in agreement. When she finished, the room erupted in applause. People approached her afterward, sharing their own stories, thanking her for speaking out and expressing a desire to make a difference in their communities. Denise felt a quiet satisfaction. Her experience, painful as it had been, was now helping others understand the importance of integrity and accountability. In the weeks that followed, Denise continued to meet with various organizations, offering guidance on bias awareness and fair treatment. She helped design workshops for officers, created materials for community outreach, and worked with schools to educate young people about their rights and the importance of respectful interactions. Her influence grew quietly but steadily, as her story inspired change in practical, tangible ways. One evening, she received an unexpected email. It was from a young officer who had attended one of the workshops. He wrote about how her story had changed the way he approached his work, how he now thought more carefully about every interaction, and how he wanted to ensure that citizens felt respected and safe. Denise read the email slowly, a soft smile forming on her face. She replied with encouragement, reminding him that every positive choice mattered, no matter how small. At home, Denise continued her personal routine, finding balance between her legal work, advocacy, and self-care. She cooked meals, read books, and spent time with family and close friends who had supported her throughout the ordeal. She reflected on how far she had come, from the fear and humiliation of the arrest to becoming a voice for change and awareness. The city also began to notice broader changes. Police officers demonstrated greater awareness of their interactions, community meetings addressed bias and accountability, and public conversations about fairness and justice were more common. Denise understood that her actions had sparked these conversations, and she felt a sense of fulfillment knowing that her experience had contributed to meaningful reform. Months later, the officer who had arrested her faced the final stages of disciplinary review. The department released a public statement detailing the actions taken. His suspension remained in place. Retraining and mentorship were mandatory, and close supervision would continue. The announcement emphasized the department's commitment to fairness and accountability, sending a clear message to both officers and the community. Denise read the statement carefully. She felt no joy in someone else's punishment, only a sense of relief that justice had been served. The outcome was not about revenge. It was about ensuring that misconduct was addressed, and that similar incidents could be prevented in the future. She reflected on the lessons learned, that dignity, calmness, and professionalism had power, and that even difficult moments could be transformed into opportunities for education and change. Her advocacy work expanded further. She collaborated with state officials, community leaders, and legal experts to create programs that addressed systemic issues, promoted respectful interactions, and emphasized accountability. She worked with schools, police departments, and civic organizations to spread awareness, always focusing on practical solutions and human-centered approaches. Her efforts were guided by the principle that change starts with understanding, empathy, and action. One afternoon, while preparing for a workshop, Denise received a message from a woman who had experienced a similar situation years earlier. The woman wrote about how seeing Denise's response had given her hope, inspired her to speak out, and encouraged her to seek justice. Denise responded with compassion, offering guidance and support and reminding her correspondent that every voice mattered. Denise's experience had come full circle. What began as a humiliating and unfair arrest had become a catalyst for change, education, and empowerment. She realized that her calm response, her professionalism, and her dedication to truth had influenced not just the department, but also the community at large. She had transformed adversity into opportunity, demonstrating that integrity and courage could overcome prejudice. In her personal life, Denise found peace and balance. She continued to excel in her legal career, taking on cases with focus and dedication. She maintained her advocacy work, mentoring young lawyers, speaking at community events, and contributing to programs aimed at improving fairness and accountability. She understood that her influence was ongoing, and that every effort, no matter how small, contributed to a broader culture of justice. The city began to recognize her efforts. Community groups invited her to speak, schools incorporated her story into educational materials, and legal organizations acknowledged her contributions to promoting fairness and awareness. Denise accepted these opportunities with humility, always emphasizing that the goal was not personal recognition, but positive impact. Through it all, she reflected on the journey she had taken. From the fear and humiliation of the arrest to becoming a voice for change, Denise had learned that resilience, calmness, and integrity were powerful tools. She understood that courage was not always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it was quiet, steadfast, and consistent. Her story had shown that even in difficult circumstances, one person could make a difference. As she walked through the city one evening, observing the streets, the people, and the life around her, Denise felt a deep sense of fulfillment. She had faced injustice and had responded not with anger, but with professionalism and determination. She had turned a negative experience into a force for good, influencing change, raising awareness, and inspiring others. Her story became a lasting example of how individuals could confront unfairness, advocate for accountability, and create meaningful impact. Denise's journey reminded everyone that respect, fairness, and integrity were essential values, and that one person's courage could ripple out to affect many lives. Looking ahead, Denise remained committed to her work, her advocacy, and her principles. She knew that challenges would continue to arise, but she also knew that she had the strength, knowledge, and resilience to face them. Her experience had shown her that change was possible, that accountability mattered, and that even ordinary moments could lead to extraordinary outcomes. Denise's life continued with purpose and clarity. She balanced her legal career with advocacy, community engagement, and personal growth. Her story had become more than just a personal experience. It was a symbol of resilience, dignity, and the power of one person to influence positive change. And as she continued her journey, Denise understood that the lessons she had learned would guide her for the rest of her life, that integrity and calmness in the face of injustice could inspire others, that fairness and accountability were essential, and that even in moments of fear and humiliation, courage and truth could shine through. Her experience had come full circle. What had begun as a traumatic event had evolved into a story of empowerment, education, and reform. Denise had faced injustice head-on, and in doing so had become a catalyst for meaningful change in her community. Her strength, grace, and dedication left a lasting impact, proving that one person could indeed make a difference.